Again, thank you for joining us, and especially those who are here physically in this extreme weather. I would like to think of this session as maybe an informal discussion, so I'll be presenting some highlights from my research topic, and maybe this will be a prompt for the discussion afterwards.
Okay.
Kant starts his critique of pure reason by announcing that human reason is burdened with questions which it cannot discuss, but which also cannot answer, since they transcend every capacity of human reason. The most famous examples of such revisited questions concern the treatment of the will, God, and the soul. Metaphysics for Kant exists as a disposition of human reason. We're naturally drawn to such revisited questions, however, cannot lead to any real conclusion. In the same critique, Kant concluded that it was impossible on purely rational grounds to understand the ideas of God, immortality, of the soul, and freedom of the soul. Nevertheless, such ideas are actually possible. But what is knowledge, and where do such revisited ideas come from? And how can they be different for the reason if we cannot understand them? Generally speaking, Kant distinguishes between considering things as objects of experience and cognition, or as appearances, and considering the same things as things in themselves. Pretentious rational beings like us, things are empirically related to us and to each other within a cognitive relation, as appearances or indeterminate objects of a sensuous relation. Such appearances are to be conceptually determined by the understanding, so as to be, in the first place, thought, understood, and cognitively related to a thing. Accordingly, we cannot really recognize anything about the existence and nature of things as considered independently of their being related to us within the cognitive, but can rather only think such things to be the logical ground of common experience.
This is the philosophy, the real objective.
Reason is that spontaneous language in inferential processes of linear generates representation, which are certain concepts and principles concerning or the unconditioned, which can't hold ideas or notions, and which are reducible to the representations of sensibility and the understanding. Hence, the ideas of reason, such as the ideas of God, freedom, and the soul, can be conceived without having the capacity to recognize and relate to them as object of sensuous experience. Reason, however, has different interests in both its theoretical and practical use. Speculative or theoretical reason consists in the recognition of all objects and principles and the restriction of speculative research, answering the question of what can I do? While practical reason is interested in the determination of the will, answering the question of what ought I do? The knowledge of such ideas, therefore, is denied to speculative reason. Nevertheless, it still cannot dismiss them. The question hitherto is, can practical reason reach beyond the boundaries of possible experience to find these ideas in its practical use? Kant's answer to this question is yes, but only from a practical point of view. Instead of attempting to address questions about possible knowledge of such ideas, Kant wants these ideas to be constructed according to the critique of pure reason. This critique, as Kant explains, demonstrates the theoretical reason that theoretical reason cannot recognize the unconditional. However, practical reason might still have ways to be considered from which a practical recognition to the unconditional may be attained. Through the use of practical reason, which has its own laws, we can extend our rational capacity and reach beyond the limits of sensuous experience, not on the ground of knowledge, but on the grounds of morality and belief. Practical reason can fill this place theoretical reason left vacant after setting its limits, by postulating reason's ideas as practical postulates, on the ground of morality, its laws, and the face supposed by it. But how can practical reason conceive the unconditioned? Kant introduces the concept of the highest good as the unconditioned totality of the object of pure practical reason. But what is the highest good, and how can it be possible? The concept of the highest good consists of virtue as the supreme condition of whatever can even seem to us desirable, and also of happiness. For virtue alone is not the whole and complete good as the object of the faculty of desire of rational finite. The only way for these elements, virtue and happiness of the highest good, to be synthesized is through a causal relation. either happiness would be the cause of virtue, or virtue would be the cause of happiness. And only by synthetically relating these concepts according to the category of causality as cause and effect could the highest good be considered. Both relations, prima facie, turns out to be impossible. So, in the world of appearances, in this world, happiness cannot be the cause of virtue, as such aim is not a moral motivation in the first place. Conversely, the striving for virtue cannot be the cause of happiness, inasmuch as man's moral dispositions are not the sole determining factor of this. Rather, our causal power is restricted by the knowledge and the laws of nature and our physical ability to use them for our purposes. Reason, therefore, seems to be tormented between two contradictory propositions. The consequence of this static state, which Kant refers to as the antinomy of pure practical reason, could be presented as follows. The highest good must be possible as a synthetic unity of happiness and virtue, unless the moral law is not to be considered as this. Or the highest good is impossible as the synthetic unity of happiness and virtue, but because the synthesis of its component is impossible. The resolution of the antinomy of practical reason just presented could be said to lie in showing in which sense and under which conditions the realization of the highest good is conceived. Kant finds his answer to this question in distinction between the world of appearances from the world of things in themselves. So it's distinction between the world of appearances from the world of things in themselves. Although the relationship Kant wants to establish between virtue and happiness to make it highly possible that virtue will lead to happiness cannot be found in the world of appearances. It could be possible through the mediation of the author of nature in the world of things in themselves, where the restrictions of the laws of the nature do not apply. Kant presents us with two sets of actions. For the realization of the highest good, that which is immediately in our power, which could be seen as the striving towards moral perfection, which Kant later on called the postulate of the immortality of the soul, and the necessary presupposition presented by reason to work as supplement to our inability to make the highest good possible, which Kant calls postulate of the existence of God. The acceptance of theoretical reason for such propositions will not, however, be as if they were cognitive or true judgments. Rather, they would only be represented by practical reason as postulates. The postulates of pure practical reason are hypotheses that act as the needed necessary conditions which, once postulated, would allow the highest good to be conceivable for practical reason. The postulates of practical reason, as Kant says, postulate the possibility of an object itself, God and the immortality of the soul, from applicative practical laws, and therefore only on behalf of a practical reason, so that this certainty of the postulated possibility is not at all theoretical. It is not a necessity matter with respect to the object, but it is instead an assumption necessary to the subject observance of its objective or passive laws, hence merely a necessary hypothesis. Kant emphasizes that the promotion of the highest good is practical objective, commanded by practice. It is a duty. From this duty emerges a need, having the force of law to assume something without which that cannot happen, which one ought to sit unfailingly, as the aim of one's conduct. That is the rational need to assume both the possibility of the highest good and of its condition.
You'll see.
Ah, but I don't know this. No, no.
You might.
Yeah, I think we
We are going to, I'm going to leave the room out for you to complete this presentation.
yes, right.
And again, please mute your mics, those who are joining over Zoom. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much for your patience and for this introduction. I think we can continue from where we left. Very fast, we can summarize that theoretical reason cannot have knowledge of complicated questions we have discussed. The whole freedom of the will and the existence of God. So a practical reason might actually have the opportunity to work around these ideas. And up until this point, we have seen that the postulates is the way practical reason is actually doing it. So Kant actually starts with introducing the postulate of the immortality of the soul to attain the first condition needed for the necessary promotion of the highest good, that is virtue, what Kant calls the holiness of the will. It is necessary by definition that no obstacles could hinder the achievement of complete conformity with the moral. However, since the attainment of holiness is both practically necessary and impossible for man in the sensible world, or the world of appearances, at one and the same time, Kant establishes that an endless progress towards holiness is the real object of the will, is necessary to assume. This holiness is to be found in this endless progress. As a result, man should consider himself immortal to be able to complete this striving. This non-temporal endless progress is the moral equivalent of the attainment of the holiness, and thereby fulfilling the necessary condition for attaining the highest good. However, it is practically not equivalent with actually having attained holiness, because this means that we would be gods, what we're not. So this is just a moral equivalent. Kant also tries to fulfill the second requirement, which was rendered impossible in this world. That is the enjoyment of happiness by finite rational beings, insofar as they have made themselves worthy of it. By assuming there is a moral purposiveness which requires an author for it, or a god, who is capable of what is beyond man's limit, that is, giving efficacy to moral pursuit. But which kind of happiness can be included in the concept of the highest good? The happiness involved in the concept of the highest good is far from being conceived as the individual happiness or the satisfaction of our individual needs. It is one that is viewed in relation to a moral world, a world of rational beings. As rational beings, we are not only concerned with our own happiness, but also interested in the happiness of others. Hence, to follow the duty of realizing the highest good, it is our duty not only to promote one's moral perfection, but also to promote the happiness of others. Moving back to the postulate of the existence of God, it is important to note that Kant does not provide an explanation for how this author makes such a connection possible, the connection between virtue and happiness. For this would claim that we can have knowledge of the supersensible, which Kant repeatedly denied. Moreover, man would never know how his actions contribute to the attainment of this world order. However, Kant seems to view the connection between happiness and virtue as a result of the possible cooperation between the purposiveness of pre-human action and the will of God. To postulate the existence of this intelligible author or this moral purposiveness only on practical ground is a necessity, a need connected with the duty of promoting the possibility of the highest good. Such necessity of postulating the postulate of God and also that of the immortality of the soul is a subjective practical necessity, not an objective duty that is not cognate in relation to the actuality of the object, the actuality of the existence of God. Hence, the postulates do not assume the existence of this intelligible being per se, or the existence of anything, including a special kind of soul. But we are assuming that we, as rational beings, need to assume the existence of an author of nature, out of the duty to make the high good possible. It is our action of believing, as rational moral agents in such existence, to make the high good possible that is demanded from us by the moral good. The postulates could then be conceived as the conditions presupposed for the performance of the necessary actions for the attainment of the object of my will. They only have an effect on conviction insofar as we are aware of our nature as moral beings. As such conditions, if believed in, they will make certain acts possible and thus become practically real in the realization, which would not be possible where the belief in them was not there in the first place. Kant has attributed the epistemic mode referred to as practical rational belief to the postulates of pure practical reason. In assigning this mode, Kant argues from a need of pure practical reason to the objective reality of the conditions of its object. So he's moving from the need to the objective reality of the conditions. He tries to provide a rational account of Glaube, or belief, or moral faith, in alignment with his primary objective to define the capabilities and limitations of reason. This account of rational beliefs makes it possible for rational moral agents to assent to propositions that enable them to avoid any practical incoherence as they engage in the moral duty. Our belief on that the highest good is possible is not a wishful thought. Rather, we believe it is possible because we have to, if we are to continue our rational pursuit of it. The hope that the highest good is possible, though comforting, is not what justifies and motivates our moral belief in it. Rather, it's our rational pursuit of it that does so. Kant defines belief as taking something to be true as only subjectively sufficient and at the same time held to be objectively insufficient. Hence, Kant's belief is a rational requirement grounded on both the lack of strong epistemic support and at the same time the agent's choice to act in a certain way. The first feature for the grounded belief, the subjective sufficiency, requires that the agent form a particular assent, while the second one does not require everyone to do so. The objective insufficiency does not require everyone to believe in this. Kant, as we have seen, suggested that the essential role of the postulate of practical reason does not consist in any kind of theoretical knowledge or command us to the belief of any of its objects, but rather in helping us perform and fulfill our moral duty by forming practically effective moral intentions. This role, however, does not explain their effect on rational agents, especially that we know we can never have sufficient evidence of them. Kant, however, conceives of a creature of both sensibility and reason. This view has been present throughout Kant's theoretical and practical philosophy. However, the postulates of practical reason are the actual manifestation of this claim. It is true that inclinations do not always point in the same direction of our moral duty, but they can and actually sometimes do, like in the case of the postulates. Hence, we must cultivate them when they do so and restrict them when they do not. The need for the postulates arises from the limits of our sensibility to perceive the possibility of the highest good in accordance with the laws of nature. Hence, it becomes for us a subjective necessity to compensate for this inability by introducing these ideas as the ground for the possibility of the highest good. The separation between reason and sensibility can actually justify that, although for reason we do not have sufficient theoretical grounds for the assertion of these postulates, they can still have an effect on us and force their sensible incentive into action. That is to say that for any rational sensuous being capable and striving to learn from experience to be virtuous, it is not a matter of reason alone. From the above discussion, it should be clear that Kant's practical postulates could be viewed as a point of connection between not only his two worlds of appearances and things in themselves, and the use of both theoretical and practical reason, but also between sensibility and reason. Thank you so much. There have been so many interruptions, so I think we might have to elaborate on a couple of points and maybe have some questions from you. either by Zoom or from the audience here. Yes, please.
Hi, so I'm curious. This might be something that I just missed in what you were saying. So Kant says that while I can't know that theoretically that God exists, I can say I am morally certain that God exists, right? Do you take that certainty to be practical knowledge, but not theoretical? Or do you take it to not be knowledge in any sense of the word?
That's exactly what Kant has been trying to elaborate in, like, I think the whole critique of practical reasoning, that there's a difference between cognition and knowledge, and for him, knowledge is actually based on knowledge is the area or the interest of theoretical reason. So what we have as the belief is actually what he calls practical cognition, not practical knowledge. So it's theoretical knowledge and practical cognition. So he's basically saying that theoretical reason or theoretical speculative reason is interested to know what we have, what we see in this world, what we can actually experience in this world, but we cannot know beyond this point. As of knowledge, we cannot know beyond this point. But practical reason can reach beyond this limit, but we cannot claim that this is knowledge. This is some cognition that we acquire by acting and by an act of belief that we act, therefore we can have this kind of cognition, or we believe this kind of cognition exists.
Can I follow up?
Yeah, please.
I'm wondering now, do you think that practical cognition is different from practical knowledge? Or do you think in the realm of the practical concerned with this broader notion of cognition only? And there's no, do you understand what I'm saying? So you might read Kant as saying that cognition just means not, it's erkenntnis, it just means knowledge. And in the practical case, when I cognize something, I know it. I know what it is that I ought to do, for instance, right? And so, are you saying that there's a kind of cognition that's broader than this notion of knowledge in the practical?
Yes,
and that's what that is. That's what faith is in that. It's the cognition, but not the knowledge.
Yes, exactly. Faith is that part
Okay.
of cognition. Faith is one part of is the ground for practical cognition. While on the other hand, knowledge is actually grounded in, or theoretical reason is actually seeks knowledge, and we cannot know beyond the limit of the appearance of the world. What we have in this, like this, the world of senses, that is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Hi. Thank you so much for everything. But when I first read the pure reason of the practical reason and pure reason as well, by Kant, they struck me as some sort of a spiritual writing or a spiritual vision of the world. So I'm going to ask you straightforward about this, especially about the point you were talking about, which is faith. Do you consider this system of ideology or whatever Kant is trying to build here is a contradiction or elaboration after Hegel? After whom? Okay.
You said after Hegel?
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I would answer the first part without the Hegel part. Yeah, the part when it comes to with whether it's a spiritual it's a spiritual attempt to give let's say
sure.
So what I can say about this is that Kant actually thinks that we only have one tool to understand this world, and that is reason. And we can use reason in order to understand what's happening in this world, but we can also extend our rational capacity, so it is not limited to understanding what we have in this sensible world, but we can also use it to extend the rational capacity in order to believe in other things, in order to believe in the metaphysical ideas. We cannot claim that we have knowledge of these ideas, but we need to believe in them in order to have a comprehensive narrative of what's going on. But either in this
looks like he's trying to leash the reason, but actually is freeing the reason.
Yes, he is somehow providing an extension. He's setting the limits. That's pretty clear, and that he was doing in the first critique.
Yeah.
So in the first critique, he is almost literally saying that we're setting the limits of reason here. We are setting the limits of our knowledge, our sense of knowledge.
Yeah.
This is what we can know, and this is what we cannot know. And what we cannot know is the metaphysical questions. We cannot have answers, like we cannot have knowledge of answers to these metaphysical questions. But still, we can extend our rational capacity because we need, in order to be consistent with our moral pursuits, in this life, we strive towards morality, and this strive is somehow endless, as we saw in the postulate of the immortality of the soul. But in order to strive for this morality, we need to believe that there is a God and our souls are immortal and that we are free, in order to have a consistent moral worldview or a consistent worldview in the first place.
Yeah, sure. And between him and Hegel, it's contradiction or elaboration?
So, I think
I'm curious to know your point of view.
I'm not very specialized in Hegel. Of course, I did some reading, but I wouldn't say maybe and maybe
Yeah.
also that
Hegel doesn't have a unit. Okay?
Yes, yes.
What's a full-fledged rational, totalizing system.
Yes, for me, I think it's a contradiction in my point of view. I don't know. What about you?
Well, it's a long story. We have another Hegel expert.
Okay,
She wrote the Hegel.
Okay.
Yes, maybe we can hear about this from you, Professor Dello. If you think that actually this, let's say, not of course that phenomenal thing, but how can Hegel fit the notion of belief in the system, or how you would view belief in this system? Because, for example, Kant presents belief as a rational thing, it's a rational act that we do. It's not something spiritual. It's not something that we fantasize about having. It's something that we act in order. It's based on action.
Yeah.
So for Hegel, what do you think about this, Professor Bello? Or it's a totally different story?
I think the same. So I thought with Professor Ahmed Abdul-Mahid, I also think that Hegel's a rationalist in general, because he thinks that reason can uncover things that that are not, according to Kant, is more possible to be understood by reason. And when it comes to the question of faith in the phenomenology of spirit, I think he values faith from an epistemological perspective, and I think he compares it with an Enlightenment perspective, which devalues faith, and he thinks no, faith is very important. It's one of the ways of knowing the object of knowledge, but I mean it's not the ultimate way of knowing that object, but it's necessary. It's an important stepping stone.
Sure. Thank you.
Could I ask?
I haven't read. Am I allowed to ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
What I got was that Kant is emphasizing on morality, just to prove the existence of God as an entity that provides this kind of sphere of moral acting for subjects. Okay. Why didn't he emphasize on the idea of having purpose or teleology instead of morality? Why morality?
The way I understood your question is whether we can have, why didn't we emphasize on the role of religion in order to reach morality, or how as you see it, we have religion, and under it we have morality, right? I mean, understanding,
Yeah.
right? So I think it's vice versa. It's the other way around. We have morality, and then morality leads to religion. It's not that religion leads to morality. So morality is the bigger umbrella for Kant, and under that comes the belief in a God, the belief in the immortality of the soul, or the belief in the freedom of the will. So for him, I would say that, and of course, Professor Ahmed can jump in about this. But actually, do you approve of this?
Well, no, I think you made a very good point. I mean, the idea of God is, or the postulate of the idea of God is mostly associated in Kant with its moral use, but I don't think that is the only use of the idea of God. in the Kantian system. One thing that is usually overlooked in Kantian scholarship is the use of the idea of God aesthetically and teleologically, which happens in the third critique, and the third critique is highly and its importance is highly understated in the scholarship on Kant. People usually read the first critique for his theory of cognition and then go to practical philosophy and read his moral theory and then talk about rational faith in light of his moral theory. But very few people talk about the expansive uses of the idea of God from an aesthetic point of view, and which becomes very interesting even in revising his notion of religion. That happens in works like, for instance, for Leysen, the lectures on the philosophical doctrine of religion, which were published posthumously after his death in 1817, if I remember correctly. So it's very, so there is a lot there to be discussed, but you are absolutely right. From a moral perspective, morality. Thank you. You named it. Professor Ellis, you had a question before?
Oh, yeah, so this is a big question. I don't expect you to have like a worked out because this is just a huge question in Kant. But what the thing that I've always found most interesting and most puzzling about rational faith is to put my finger on and be able to explain what the attitude of faith is. And the reason is that it seems in Kant it's this peculiar attitude whereby I believe something, which at the same time I acknowledge that my belief is somehow insufficient for knowing it. This isn't normally the case, I think, right? So it's not normally the case that when I believe something for Kant, I am able to doubt whether my belief goes all the way to the facts, right? Or something, right? So normally in theoretical judgment, if I judge that something is true, it's also constitutive of my judgment that I think it's true, right? There's not a further act outside of the judgment to evaluate whether what I'm judging is true or not. That's just part of it. Here we seem to have this attitude where I'm saying, I'm certain. And he says, I can be morally certain of this. And yet at the same time, in the same certainty, be open to the possibility that I'm wrong or what? I mean, I guess that's the question. What is that kind of weird conflict? And is that something that Kant can explain in a sufficient way, such that we aren't contradicting ourselves or we aren't involved in a kind of paradox, a Morian paradox, right? Where say it is raining outside, but I don't know that it's raining.
Yes.
Although, right, I think it stopped raining now. So.
We all hope so.
Does that make sense?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, I think you were touching one crucial point is that actually Kant, what is, as I was saying at the beginning, the main thing Kant wants to focus about is what reason can actually verify and tells us about, and what we can know that we actually know, and what we need to, what we are doomed to ask, but we would never have answers to. And hence I need to accommodate, or let's say to recycle these ideas in my system in a way that reason would accommodate for, but at the same time I cannot say that knowledge, that I can have knowledge of them, that I can know these ideas, for example. So I would say that in contradiction to what he calls the dogmatic metaphysics, he would like to still keep the same ideas but still recycle them in his system in a way that would make it I would say mitigate the claim that we cannot know them a bit, or that we can have some sort of an epistemic status towards them, but it's not really knowledge. its belief. So he's saying that this belief is some sort of an epistemic status. It's not sufficient, but still it's an epistemic status or an epistemic mode that I can assign to these ideas, and I would never be able to get rid of them. And this is the fact that he's at the very first sentence in the critique of pure reason, he's saying that we are somehow doomed to look for these ideas and we can never dismiss them. And that's the way it is. We will always fall into this paradox or in this antinomy as a thinking.
Okay, great, thank you.
I actually have a question that is somehow related to this question. Let's assume that you're about, will you be happy with the sort of Kantian belief that first of all acknowledges or confesses that the idea of God is objectively insufficient? You as a God, would you be happy with something like that?
I'm not sure if he's saying that it's objectively insufficient. It's objectively insufficient for us as rational human beings.
Yes.
Because we have limits to our knowledge. And this is the way he made us this way, supposedly, that we have limits to what we can know and what we cannot know. And actually, Kant at some point says that if we knew these things, if we knew that there is a God, if we knew that our souls are immortal, we wouldn't be moral for being moral. We would just be moral for the sake of not being punished, or we would be moral for the sake of not going to hell, or we would not be moral for the sake of being moral. And that's what is important for him. This is what he is evolving around all the time, that we need to be moral for the sake of being moral. We don't need to be moral to get the reward at the end, not to go to hell or heaven.
Yes, but what do you think is important for God? I mean, that's another point actually that somehow like diminishes the value in this sort of belief, because it's not a belief that seeks God for himself. Rather, it's a belief that seeks God for something else. But first of all, we have a belief that knowingly believes in something, while like being aware that it's objectively insufficient or like objectively not yet like accepted or really there. And the second thing is that I believe in something that I don't need for itself or for himself. It's rather needs something else, or like the umbrella morality that you're talking about. But does this make you happy as a God?
I think that one important thing to mention here is that all what we are narrating here is the point of view of us as rational human beings. We're not talking about the point of view of God. So this is the narrative from our perspective, from our standpoint as rational human beings who have limits to knowledge. But that's another the perspective of God, or as you're asking, is not, we're not talking about this here.
Yes.
The whole narrative wouldn't fit under your question. See what I'm getting at? We're not going. It's like you are in one. You know the famous example of the letter 6 or 9. We have two different standpoints.
Helen? Yes, I think there's something in common with Dr. Ellis's question and his question, which is that there are two different conceptions of truth at play, and that is why there could be I think, I'm not sure yet, there is an apparent contradiction between how belief functions as something that we could be certain of, this moral certainty, and how at the same time it is different from another type of certainty. So maybe what is being mentioned as objectively true in the practical reason is objectively true in a sense, while what's mentioned as being true or having some sort of truth value in the critique of pure reason has a different sense of truth. So I don't think that Kant would say that the idea of God in the practical reason is somehow insufficient objectively. Like the categories of pure reason, they're objective and they are imperatives. The categorical imperatives in practical reasons and the critique of practical reason, they are objective and everybody should abide by them, and they're reached by by some sort of speculations on maxims and all this Kantian moral theory, and they're objective in a Kantian sense. They're objective. They're true. However, they're reached by practical reason, not by theoretical reason or pure reason or speculative reason. So, in a sense, could you say that we're talking or we're discussing different types of truth? They're still true, but they're true in a different sense of the word truth. So the existence of God is not objectively insufficient. And when I say that I have some sort of moral certainty that is training outside, it's not the doubt in it. It's not that it's not true. The doubt in it is that it applies to a different form of truth, to truth that is reached, that we reach using a different procedure of reasoning. I'm curious to know what do you think about it?
I think we're touching on a couple of important points actually, which reminds us of the question
Yes, exactly.
whether we go from religion to morality or from morality to religion. I think what is objectively insufficient here is our between or what we have belief in, like the ideas of existence of God or immortality of the soul, freedom of the will. We're not questioning morality. If we might question something, we would question the belief in these three ideas. I think just mentioning, for Kant, what's important is morality, not the existence of God and the postulates. I wouldn't actually say that this is not important, but I would say that, for example, if I have another way to accomplish that, if you may remember the presentation what we said today, we have the moral law and we have the highest good as the object of practical reason. So if I can, by any other means, achieve the object of practical reason, the highest good, whether by in this narrative he's providing to the postulates, the immortality of the soul and the existence of God. These are somehow options or ways to make the highest good possible. What his main concern is making the highest good possible. I would say that if he could find another way, or maybe other ways to reach or to make the highest good possible, other than the existence of God and the immortality of the soul, he wouldn't have any problem with that. It's just that it's these ideas are just ways for him to reach to morality, to make morality, to make our moral pursuit consistent, or to make our to make us in consistent with our moral pursuit. Yeah, that's the best way to say it. So, are the belief in them not really objective? I would say yes. He doesn't really see them, although he says that it's a need and he provides some elucidation for that. But I think if he managed to find any other way, or if we distract him from the argument and somehow reach the point where we say that the highest good could be achieved or could be possible in some other ways, we wouldn't actually need the existence of God or immortality of the soul.
Yeah, actually, it's just to point out to his question, happiness is also, I think, takes precedence over morality in a sense. I'm not sure. I'm just going to say something. So, there is good. There's good that we were asked to do good in this world. However, people who do good don't live happily, and that is just unfair. So, and there is this disparity between happiness and morality or what's good. So for those, that's basically just a moral argument. So for those to reach some sort of equilibrium, you have to postulate the existence of a being which is capable of judging. You're obligated to practically speculate, like reach that conclusion. So I'm not sure. He said that there could be other ways, and he wouldn't mind those other ways. So what does that say about this? Some sort of practical certainty.
Yes, exactly. It's the way he makes it possible. The way he makes the let's say I don't have anything else in mind to say that this would be an alternative narrative to that. But I would say that what is at stake here is whether the highest good is possible or not. Not that he would actually make it. Of course, the existence of God and the immortality of the soul make the narrative complete and makes it consistent for us to actually morally pursue to pursue the moral or to pursue morality. But at the same time, if we can do it any other ways, I don't think that it
Kant is Christian. Yeah.
Question. Okay, are you?
No,
Okay, I just want to go to our
yes.
attendees online. Are there any questions online? Fadil, would you mind reading your question? Unmute yourself and read it for us if you don't mind. Fadil?
Hello?
Yes, thank you.
Can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
Fadil, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Hello?
Okay.
Hello?
What is this?
I'm just trying to raise the
Oh,
voice.
thank you. Okay. Okay, so Khaled, if you can read the question as
does Kant take the necessity of belief in God, immortality of the soul, and free will for humans to live moral lives for granted, or has he tried to rationally make the case that they are necessary? If the latter is the case, how has he attempted to do so? I ask this because there are many other schools and even religions, Buddhism, that would argue that they are not necessary to live moral lives.
Thank you.
Or has he tried to rationally make the case that they are necessary? If the latter is the case, how has he attempted to, if he's not rationally given? What I understand from the question is that if you're asking if Kant is actually making some sort of a logical argument to say that we actually need God and immortality of the soul, that there is a certain belief in I'm not sure I understand what you mean by for granted, taking this for granted. If you're asking if he's providing an argument for that, but if that's the question, I think the answer is no, he's not providing an argument because he said these are postulates, and that's why we cannot have any rational argumentation of them. But the need for them comes from the fact that we are rational beings, and since we are rational, we cannot seek something that we can believe is not achievable. And in order to achieve the highest good, we need to have these two conditions. So to put this more clearly, we need to achieve the highest good, and the highest good requires two conditions, that is the immortality of the soul and the existence of God. If I cannot achieve these conditions, or if I cannot make these conditions possible, then I wouldn't be able to have the final end or the final goal, that is the highest good. So that's how we put them as a necessity, or that's how we perceive them as rational needs. Because otherwise I wouldn't be rational if I'm seeking something that I cannot actually achieve or I cannot make possible. And I have to make it possible. I have to make the highest good possible, because that's what makes me moral, or we're certain of morality, we're certain that we're moral. So I need to make sense of this somehow, or I need to make it consistent. I need to make a consistent narrative of this. If that's what if I'm answering your question, that's good. If not, please elaborate on the question.
Are you sure that he's there actually at this one?
Well, his iPad is, yeah, I think yes. He said yes, thank you. So, okay, any other questions from our Zoom guests? Okay, well, any other questions in the room? Otherwise, we would like to. Okay, well, I think we should research, and also for coming in that extreme weather, and to all of you for staying and hanging out listening to think about Kant in the middle of the rain. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.